Hey Peter, my friend, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I thought it'd be a good place to start was with Twitter. I don't know if you saw yesterday where you had Mr. Jeremy Vine kind of tweeting at you. Is that a regular thing that happens with you?
Oh well, unfortunately, it seems to be more regular than I'd like it to be. But no, so he did this segment on Rishi Sunak. This was kind of before all the tax stuff came out, and it was about was he too rich to be chancellor? And I don't know about you, but I just found the entire thing just a little vulgar, a little bit. I don't know whether it's just me being overly British and thinking, oh, we don't talk about money, but no, I just didn't like it. I just thought, well, there are a lot of very wealthy people in politics. Everybody knows this. On the left and on the right, you got the likes of Emily Thornberry, got a multi-million-pound property portfolio. Jeremy Corbyn exactly wasn't short of a bob or two. And, those questions were never asked about them, about whether they could relate to people or anything like that. And now somehow, because he's a conservative, he seems completely unable to. And I just thought, oh, I just had to just put this little tweet out there,
Yeah.
and it got quite a bit of traction actually.
Yeah.
And like, I had a few friends who work in the media and kind of in politics as well, saying like, I really wanted to reply to you, but I can't. And they're saying like, thank you for having a go at this, because it was just utterly ridiculous. And I don't get me wrong, there are questions to ask about money and politics. There always are. But the idea that just because you've got so many zeros in your bank account means you're completely unable to empathize with somebody, I just thought was idiotic, utterly idiotic.
So like I saw your tweet because I retweeted it. And
Yeah.
then I thought it was a really good tweet, so I retweeted it. And I think there's a song called Alan Lyons who follows us both. He also tweeted it or something. And then I just see Jeremy Vine's like message coming and I'm like tagged with you and Alan and a few others. And I'm like, what is going on here? But do you use Twitter quite a bit, don't you?
I do, yeah. So I kind of joined Twitter about 12 years ago. I'm kind of like one of the OGs on Twitter, really, in the political one. I've had it for quite some time, but really, when I first got it, it wasn't really used like it is now. It was nowhere near the powerful platform that it
Right.
is. I think I was in like, I think first year of university when I got it, all those decades ago now. But yeah, so I do use Twitter quite a lot. One thing, because I'm a political consultant, one of the things we kind of have to have is kind of like an online presence. And
Right.
as I kind of do a little bit of media work here and there. So it's kind of handy for it in a professional sense, but also it is good to kind of like I do kind of a big believer in the platform of like connecting with people.
Yeah.
I've always believed there's nothing better than reading your own opinion, like in somebody else's tweets,
Mm.
like somehow you realize that you're not the only one that thought this. You're not the only one that thinks about things in a certain way, and I think that's a really powerful thing. And so I'm a really big fan of social media. Like I'm on all of them. I'm a complete addict. Trust me, I openly admit I openly admit to that.
Even
I
Facebook?
could really go on. Sorry.
Even Facebook?
Yes, I'm still on Facebook. Yes, because I'm that old. But no, Facebook's slightly different. I kind of use that a little bit more personal stuff than because I try to keep the politics off Facebook, because like everybody on my Facebook I actually know.
Got it.
So I just kind of keep it off that, and I kind of use it just to kind of talk about maybe nights out, or just more like family social stuff than the politics. I used to use it for politics, but then I kind of just shifted it all over to Twitter. But then the other one, I suppose, is Instagram, which I have to admit I do like Instagram. That's
Yeah.
interestingly, I read this fact the other day that 15% of 16 to 25-year-olds get their news from Instagram.
Wow.
Yeah, I found that terrifying.
Yeah.
Because there's always this line that people get their news from social media now,
Mm.
and I'm like, well, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that they're following the BBC, the Guardian, the Times, or whatever, or they're getting the news from strangers on the internet with no verification as to what they're saying? Like, what? It's a very broad statement that doesn't really mean anything, and it's just something that I've always wanted to ask a pollster, and I wouldn't mind. I know a lot of pollsters, and I never get around to asking them that question.
It's a good question. I really struggle with Instagram. So I really like Twitter. I really,
Yeah,
really like Twitter. I find it a lot easier. I'm a lot more true reflection of myself on Twitter. That's who I am. Instagram,
yeah,
I've really I really struggle with it. I'm on like a campaign trail at the moment. I'm
Yeah.
running for the Seaton Riverside, Maine, a small place here. And so I've forced myself to use Instagram. Like I'm forcing myself to do a post a week because apparently that's the right thing to do. So
Yeah.
uh, I'm
Yeah. So
trying
this
to
is
do more. Yeah.
it's interesting. This is one of the things that I kind of do for a living is, I run campaigns and, there's always the problem of over posting. Like you
Mm.
get a lot of people like who've never run for office for anything before, and they just need to think they need to bombard people all the time with it. And it's about one post a week. Usually you should do it on a Thursday at lunchtime. Statistically, that's when you get the most views. Apparently, on all the research that we get given, that's when you're supposed to do that. It's Thursday lunchtime. So if you ever want a tweet of yours to, a post of yours to go viral on Instagram, that's
Thursday.
when to do it. Because apparently, it's when people have like most tuned out,
Okay.
so they're more likely to look at your like at Instagram and kind of interact with things a little bit more. Because that's the key now with Twitter and Instagram and even with Facebook. It's not about how often you tweet. It's about your interactions. Like you can be literally posting things, but if no one's interacting with it, you've no sign about whether anybody's actually reading it or engaging with it or being challenged by it or anything. The thing you've got to look at now is how many likes is it getting, how many retweets, how many favorites. These are the things that we actually look at, from a professional side of stuff. But because it tells us where people actually what they actually care about, because if there's people don't care about it, then they just scroll past it. And like you said, there's so much now, but yeah, it's and I saw that you were running in the locals, and getting used to doing the social media stuff can be difficult,
Oh,
potentially in campaigns,
I find it so hard. On Instagram is the one where I'm just so I've got a Facebook page.
yeah, I've seen that, yeah.
I post on there, but the Instagram one is tough. Somebody actually gave me some really good advice on Instagram. I think which was good when I started this campaign, which was be yourself. So post as your age, the things that you do, the fact that you like football, music, whatever. Because there was a stage when I first started using Instagram, and I had an idea that I was going to run for local election. I started posting basically every week just politics stuff. So it was literally just like webinars and stuff like this. And I remember someone saying to me, it literally, your page is the most boring page in the world and you don't do that many boring things. You should probably open it up a bit. So I've started to try and be myself a bit on Instagram.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good advice, because the thing that candidates have to do is actually make yourself more personable. You have to make yourself a relatable human being. And I see it every time it gets to local elections. My Facebook notifications goes mental with please like my page because somebody's running for this ward or whatever. And everybody sets all this stuff up, and then like you said, they just bombard it with politics. And your friend's right. Like you've got to show that you like going to the football. You've got to show that you like going out for meals, going for a drink. Show that more importantly, that you have friends. It's actually a really big one. Because people vote for personable people, and it's one of those, particularly in Britain, it is a very unique British thing. But we always like one of the biggest questions that that used to be asked in British polling was, would you go for a pint with this person? So would you actually spend like an evening drinking in a pub with this person? And it used to be a big factor about whether this person had any future in politics. Because nobody wants to sit next to the guy that wants to talk about housing policy at 7:00 on a Friday night, but they do want to sit next to the guy and talk to the guy that wants to talk about the football on a Saturday afternoon. It's that relatability which I think we're now demanding more of in our politicians. We're demanding that the politicians actually listen to us and actually reflect not just our values but who we are as a people. I think that's really starting to come to have a bit of a fight back, really.
That's interesting. You say that because, I think we discussed that before, but I didn't realize that has such a major impact. So when you see now on my Instagram every week me posting pictures of me in the pub.
Oh, okay. Don't go overboard. Don't go overboard because then you look like an alcoholic.
And I'm definitely not that. So
no, not at all.
But okay, talking of Twitter, you've probably seen Elon Musk buying shares into Twitter. I think it's around 9%. What's your thoughts on that? Are you happy with that? Good
Yeah, so I'm a big Elon Musk fan. I have to admit, I'm a bit of a fanboy. I think he's brilliant. I like the fact that he upsets, for me, all the right people. You know, the fact I like his little Twitter spats with Elizabeth Warren, you know, the U.S. Senator.
Yeah.
I think they're very entertaining. But no, when it comes to him buying Twitter, it's quite an interesting thing. One thing I would really like to know was, did Twitter or anybody, any of the other major shareholders, did they try and like block him from buying into it? Because Elon Musk has a very unique way of running his companies and a very unique, very hands-on way of doing things. And Twitter and Elon have a very interesting history in general, given how he behaves on the platform. You know, a number of times he's probably violated the kind of terms that, you know, the behavior terms and stuff. And I think he got blocked once or twice from the platform already. You know, it would be interesting to see whether Twitter kind of pushed back a little bit. That's the one thing I want to find out about it. I do think a lot of people are kind of running away with themselves a little bit, thinking he's going to like bring back Donald Trump, that he's going to suddenly change the platform entirely. I think that's a little fanciful, but I think we will see some changes. I think a little bit, but it won't be wholemeal, like wholesale kind of stuff. I think it'll be little pieces here and there that'll just have a little bit more flexibility in it. And I think that'll be his influence. But it all depends about how hands-on he actually gets. And like I said, he's known for being very hands-on. And it's whether that kind of impending kind of fight between the kind of you know, what's considered to be a kind of bias within the tech community and Elon, you know, actually come to a head now. It's going to be fun to watch over the next couple of years, I have to admit.
So I saw the Twitter CEO. I think it's Parag.
The new guy. Yeah.
He had an exchange on Twitter with Elon, and he basically said that Elon had been speaking to him, and I think other people on the board for the last few weeks. So it's been apparently in conversation for a while. I'm similar to you. I love Elon Musk. I love what he does on Twitter. I love him in general, what he's doing for society. And so I'm really happy that he's bought this. You know, he's got involved, bought these shares. My kind of question back to you, and this will be interesting to you because as a fellow conservative, if you like, is do you worry about the amount of power he is like going to have, having this social media platform? He has one of the biggest companies in the world, and now is arguably the biggest shareholder and probably the biggest social media firm in the world.
Yeah, and it is an interesting question, isn't it? About would we have the same opinion of Elon Musk if he wasn't kind of maybe more on our side of the aisle on a few issues? It is. I have to admit, I've asked myself this question a few times. You know, because I tried to keep, despite being a conservative, I tried to keep as open a mind as possible and try to ask kind of, you know, the questions from the other side. But I honestly don't know the answer to your question. I am a little bit concerned about certain individuals holding a lot of power over what I view as the new public square. So I'm what's known as a free speech radical. I think you can be as horrible as you like on social media, because then, in my opinion, I then know what you actually think. My biggest problem of kind of blocking people off social media platforms is it doesn't mean that they change their opinions. All it does is I don't get to see them anymore. I don't really know what these people think. And having so few people have very tight control over that public square, it does concern me quite a lot, because all it takes is one or two people with a very particular view on something, and that changes how the entire platform works, which can change the entire discourse in nations and democracies. That is the reality that we have now. And it is concerning, you know, the amount of power big tech have, you know, when it comes to our influence in elections and just in our day-to-day lives. Like, how many times do you sign into something via Facebook or via Twitter? You know, even in just like signing up to a Wi-Fi in a pub, is you do it via a social media platform. You don't even, like, the number of times you don't really fill out the form that
The form takes ages otherwise.
It takes ages, doesn't it? So you just say, oh, sign in via Facebook. But again, that's, you know, it's an influence that they've had in our lives that we don't even think twice about. And don't get me wrong, I don't think all the influence is bad, but I do think we have to start taking a check of this stuff. And I know in America, the breaking up of big tech has been on the kind of political agenda for a little while now. And I think it's Ted Cruz, the U.S. senator, from Texas. I know this has been his big thing of going after Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, and all the rest of them. But yeah, I think this kind of century, or like era, whatever you want to call it, is going to be about privacy. It's going to be about the role that tech has in our lives and the amount of power that we still retain as individuals. I think that's going to be the new debate. You know, every kind of era has its kind of like, you know, and this was the social justice era, this was that, this was everything, you know, civil rights movement, and all the rest of it. This is going to be about privacy. It's about what information is out there about you and whether you can control that information. And I don't know whether governments are prepared to have this fight yet. I don't know if they're ready to. I don't know if they're willing to, but I tell you right now, I think there's a lot of people in the country that are very skeptical of big tech and want something done to kind of rein in their power, to both on the left and on the right. I don't see this as a kind of political spectrum issue. I see this as a kind of society issue, as a kind of broad one. And I think it's actually probably people of our generation, you know, like early 30s, who have kind of grown up with social media. Like I remember the first time I got Facebook. I remember when it was a thing. I remember MySpace and Bieber. I remember, you know, we've grown up and we've seen the evolution of this stuff. And I think it's our generation that will become more skeptical of it compared to people who are a little bit younger, say, who have never known a world without Facebook. As I remember a world very much without it. I just realized how old that made me sound.
You know, going to your free speech, right? Because you know what, I think I've really joined you on this. There was I think what the turning point for me was, I read about the Jewish lawyers in the 1920s and 30s who advocated and campaigned to allow Nazi speech to be listened to in America. Yeah. So they really advocated that this needs to be listened to. We shouldn't like stamp it out, because we can argue in terms of, you know, we can expose how stupid and how crazy this ideology is. Don't, like, you know, censor it, because if we censor it, then, you know, we can't actually argue about how horrible and disgusting it is. And that was a really fascinating way to look at it, because there's their own people.
That's exactly how I view it. You know, this idea that if you censor people, you take their platform away, that you know that they're not going to have any effect anymore. Well, all I had to do is point to the likes of Tommy Robinson, Katie Hopkins. You know, even those kind of people still wield incredible influence. But the problem is the mainstream isn't aware that they're still gathering support. It might not be very loud, but it might not be very large or anything like that. But it's still support. It's still people with these kind of views. And unfortunately, if they ever reorganize and actually get themselves together, I don't know if the mainstream is really strong enough anymore to put up a decent fight, because for the last 15 years or so, everybody who's vaguely right wing is literally Hitler, and everybody who's a little bit to the left is basically Stalin. You know, we've kind of ruined the political discourse by always running to the extremes of everything. So when we actually see a fascist these days, we can't point them out, because everything's a fascist. Everyone's a fascist. You know, I always look back to the incident of Nick Griffin, the former BM. He might be former BMP. I don't know if he still is. But when he was on Question Time, and everybody went mental, saying, "How can you put somebody like Nick Griffin on Question Time?" This was a period where the BNP had really actually started to poll quite well in some kind of local elections, and they were rumored to be winning quite a few seats.
How long ago was this?
Well, let's just say Jack Straw was the Labour representative, so it's a little while ago. But Jack Straw was the Labour guy on it, and you know there was a lot of pressure on him to kind of give Nick Griffin to take him to task. But all you really had to do with Nick Griffin was ask him a couple of reasonable questions, and he had no answers to them. This is the thing with these people. When you actually make them answer a question, actually debate them, they've got nothing. And what this really showed people was, yeah, the rhetoric's fine, but look at the people. You know, you might not, you know, the rhetoric is very appealing, you know, British jobs, British workers, all that kind of stuff. But we'll look at the people, and they don't, when you actually just put a little bit of pressure on them, they crumble. And that's what you need to do. I've always said that sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. Shine a light on something, and eventually, you know, it shows itself for its true colors. And it turned out that the local elections after this incident, you know, the BNP didn't win any seats, and, you know, their support completely collapsed. But, you know, I do get this idea, you know, that some of this speech, it can be very dangerous, and it's disgusting, and it's awful, and it's vile. and it's not nice to listen to. But I'd like you said with the Jewish lawyers in the 1920s, you've got to listen to it, because then you know what you're actually up against. And I don't think people realize that they're just under the mainstream, just under the surface now. There is still a very ugliness in society, and I don't believe we're doing enough to combat it in the way that we're going about it.
I'm definitely going to steal your sunlight quote, because
To be fair, I nicked it off. One of my old university professors. I remember hearing, and I think I am going to use that line for the rest of my life.
That is a good line. That is a strong line. I've never heard that before. That is a good line. Going on to the sort of talk about back to sort of censorship and stuff. I'm talking about the Jewish lawyers, and also we saw Donald Trump being banned from Twitter. It's very sad because I think he launched his new app or something recently, and it apparently didn't go well, but his net worth went up by like 600 million or something crazy. So, and I find myself, I'm like now I'm super fascinated to hear Trump. Like when I had him on Twitter, when I was following, I didn't really care or whatever. I just had him on Twitter. Now I am, because I can't listen or see what he's doing or saying. If I had the opportunity to, if you said, Trump show tonight at 9 p.m. on Sky News, it's like I would 100% record and watch for sure.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I have to admit, I didn't really follow much of his new social media thing, because I expected it to be a flop. But I do remember reading that his wealth went up over it. Trump still commands a significant amount of support, not just in America, but around the world. He still is looked at with quite a lot of admiration. But no, I'm with you. It's like, Sky News suddenly said they've got an interview with former President Donald Trump at 9 o'clock. I am tuning in at 9 o'clock. I'm still interested in what this person has to say. And I don't know whether that's because you just don't know what's going to happen. And it's that kind of, this is an entertainment thing. I don't know. Well, I do look at our current crop of politicians in the UK, and I'm like, God, you're all boring. Yeah. Even Boris has got quite boring, really. I remember when he was mayor of London, he was larger than life. He was the guy that got stuck on the tightrope, and he was you've seen that video of him where he kind of barges that kid out of the way when he's playing rugby. That's the Boris Johnson that that I think won the general election. But the Boris we've got now, I don't know. For me, he's kind of lost that spark a little bit. But with the Trump stuff, I don't really know the answer to that as to why we still love these people. But, like I said, any interview with him, I'm still going to tune in and watch.
I think we had Sir Linton Crosby, who was Boris's advisor for the mayor elections. And he's a political consultant.
Yeah.
He does loads.
One of the best in the world. I'd love to work for Linton. Trust me, if he'd offered me a job, I'd snap it up like that.
Maybe we'll do a connecting email between.
Look at this! I got a job out of this as well.
we had him on the platform, and I remember after like a few minutes of him speaking, thinking like, I need to get my notepad out and like just take notes, because he was just like insane. He's like, right, okay, there's a 5-step approach. You do this, and then you need to be this, and it was literally just, he was doing it off the bat, and it was crazy. But one big things that he said was he thinks that the big change in political leaders in the last 5-10 years is people now crave authenticity more than ever. That they crave people who are, like you say, normal. I think we had an era of Blair, Cameron, Obama, who are really smart, sophisticated, say the right things, look good,
polished, polished people.
That's the word, very polished people. But now people are really craving authenticity. People who might be a bit, off the wall a little bit, or doesn't always say the right. So he made a massive point about how authenticity now in politics is like so important. So important.
Yeah, it's interesting, really, when you think about it, because if you look at some of the major figures of British politics, Jeremy Corbyn, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, you wouldn't exactly use the word authentic around them, but yet the people that vote for them would consider them to be authentic. But the minute the people on the other side consider them to be complete frauds and fakes, it does seem to be, again, a very this side and that side, there's a clear dichotomy between it. It is interesting that, actually, because I would agree with Linton on that authenticity is a major thing now, definitely, but considering where we've gone through an era of populism, like in our politics, like, big names and big personalities. There were none of them, even the ones I support, would really say that what we see on the camera is exactly what they are in real life. You're the same as me when you get to know you. I would say Boris is the closest.
Okay.
Boris is definitely the closest, but there was always that really famous story about when he was mayor of London, and he was in the back of a black cab and he was turning up to an event, and he kind of ruffled up his suit and he messed up his hair, and then he got out of the cab as though his kind of hair and all of that. Now, whether that story is actually true, I don't know, but I've heard it repeated to me about 100 times, 200 times now when it comes to him. But you're the same as me, so that like you get to know a lot of MPs, and you get to know them personally to a degree, and they are really authentic people. But I think there's also an element of, we don't allow politicians to make mistakes. We don't allow politicians to say, oh, I thought this on Monday, but I read this and I listened to this person and now I've changed my mind. We don't allow that. The minute you saw a politician suddenly changes his mind, it's a U-turn, or it's a, it's flip-flopping, sometimes it's not. Sometimes people legitimately change their opinions. As a public, or maybe it might be media pressure, it could be a bit of both. We don't allow that to happen. So that, I think that's where then people start to feel that politicians aren't authentic, because they never change their opinions. But then I always come back to them and say, well, the minute they change their opinion, you're going to jump down the throat and say that they don't know what they're talking about, or they don't stand for anything. I would much rather have a government that consistently U-turns than a government that doesn't listen. Don't get me wrong, both are disastrous, but I would rather have a government that listens to when it's getting something wrong and changes its approach. I think too many U-turns, I think we're seeing in the current government, is a problem. But one or two, every now and then on major issues, I think it's good that they are willing to change their minds and are open to listening to popular dissent, really.
I'll give a good example. That was Obama, and I actually really liked him for this. This is one thing I really liked him. I think it was 2004 when he was running as a potential candidate for president. He was early stages. They asked him about gay marriage, and I don't know if you know this. He came out and said, "Look, I'm a Christian man, raised Christian, so I don't support gay marriage. I'm happy with homosexuality. I don't care about it, but don't support it." He then obviously, famously, became president and legalized gay marriage, and I actually really respected him for that, because I felt like, I think it was definitely the right thing to do on my views on it. But I think the fact that he had the decency or the ability to say, look, maybe I was wrong 4 years ago, maybe I didn't actually really think this through, or I didn't really engage with the public, or whatever the case. I think at the time when he said this, the majority weren't in favor of gay marriage. By the time he did, the majority were. But I did really respect him for that, because he could have easily carried on down this route and just said, I don't agree with it. But he clearly didn't hold that strong an opinion on it, which is what I took away from that. And I think fair enough.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you on that, because I remember that this was always one of his biggest criticisms. Everyone always said he was the most progressive president that America's seen sometimes, and the one that everybody always comes back to saying, well, he was never originally in favor of gay marriage. I don't really like how people use gay marriage as a kind of litmus test for your liberalism. There are some legitimate reasons as to why you may not be in favor of it, like, for example, your religion or something like that. But I do know what you're talking about. But I always get the feeling with Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton was another one who was famously not massively in favor of gay marriage at the start, when she ran against Obama in 2008, and now she's like the biggest champion of gay rights ever. But there is that element of like, he's willing to change his mind. But as you said at the beginning, the majority of people weren't in favor of it. Then society changed its mind, and then Obama changed his mind. So there's some element of maybe a bit of politicking in there. But I do think a lot of people, when it comes to those kind of social issues, unless you're really passionate about it, a lot of people don't care. But particularly in the UK, in America, it's very different. Social politics is a huge thing. But here in the UK, I remember when the gay marriage was happening here, I had loads of friends asking me like, oh, gay marriage is happening. It must be amazing for you. You must be really happy and everything. And I was like, I don't really care. Yeah, fair enough, I'm gay and all the rest of it. But, it wasn't really, I never really viewed it as as my issue or something like that. For some people, they definitely did, and everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But some people that were just like, we'll just get on with it. It wasn't part of their lives. It was nothing that really affected them. So that most people just didn't care. But I do. Going back to what you're saying about Obama, I do think you're right. He was more willing to listen, and I think that's the big factor. Is it's whether you're willing to actually listen to people that disagree with you. Trump didn't listen to anybody that disagreed with him. For a long time, Boris Johnson didn't, I don't think. Farage never listens to anybody that disagrees with him. I must say, I'm not anti-Nigel Farage, by the way, but he's an interesting figure in British politics still. But yeah, on that stuff, we just got to be a little bit more forgiving, I think, when people want to change their opinion. I think that's the big word. Just be a bit more forgiving when people kind of come around to a different way of thinking. It's not abandoning a principle. It could be adopting a new one. That's the way to think of it, I think.
It's a fine line, right? Because like another one that I really liked, who didn't change his opinion, and I completely disagreed with him, was Jacob Rees-Mogg. If you remember, there was that stage, I think he might have been under Theresa May, when he was really gaining a lot of momentum, where people were like talking of him potentially being
the leader.
Yeah. And then he went on, I think it was ITV, and this kind of like, destroyed any chance of this happening. He went on ITV and they asked him about abortion.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And he came out and just said, I'm Catholic and I don't believe in abortion. And then they asked him about what if it's, whatever. And he's like, I don't care. Like I'm Catholic and abortion is wrong. Like for me, I don't judge other people for it, but just personally for me, that's my take. And I really, really, as much as I disagreed so much with him, I really respected him so much after that. You know what? You're actually, you actually have principles and morals. Don't agree with them, but fair enough. Like
it's interesting you say that, because a lot of my friends are kind of pro-choice on that issue, and I do remember that particular interview because, like you said, at the time people were kind of thinking he could be the next leader because he was like, it's kind of the Mogmentum was kind of that with that big moment, wasn't it? And people were seriously considering whether he could be like in a leadership position or higher in the cabinet or something. And I do remember a lot of people saying, look, I think he's completely wrong, but you've got to respect the man that, he could have just flipped his opinion and gone with it and, ridden the kind of general consensus, but he didn't. He kind of stood there and he said what he believed in. And I think that gets you a lot of respect these days. But the thing with Rees-Mogg is he plays a very smart game. He's a very intelligent man. He knows how to play politics very well. And he knows how to play the media very well. He's never shied away from changing who he is. What was he, Minister for the 18th Century or something ridiculous like that? He was what's called. But I do remember that interview very well because I remember watching it thinking, well, that's just sank any chance of him ever being leader. But it was interesting to see the number of my friends, particularly on the left, who said, look, I think he's wrong. I think he's backwards and all these things, but at least he had the gumption to say it, and particularly say it on morning television as well.
Serious courage. Well, you got currently, he's one of the favorites to be next future leader. We should probably speak about this. Everyone's talking about the taxation, the wealth of Rishi Sunak. If you like, educate people on this, because I'm sure lots of people will have just seen Rishi Sunak rich, wife rich, lots of money to avoid tax, and that's the general takeaways that I think most people probably have. You obviously got a lot more knowledge on this, so if you could give
basically, I've done nothing but talk about this for the last last 2 or 3 days. But so basically, Rishi Sunak's wife is the daughter of of an Indian billionaire. So I keep talking about Russian billionaires as well as an Indian billionaire. He's a very self-made man. I think he's a steel magnate or something. He's got fingers in many pies and everything. And she has claimed what's known as non-dom status. So she's a non-domicile. So she's registered. So that means that she doesn't pay UK tax on any income that she earns outside of the UK. This is kind of pretty standard for particularly very wealthy people who have businesses offshore, and it just allows them not to claim any tax. It's important to note she hasn't broken the law. This is a really good starting point. This isn't tax avoidance. This is following the law. She hasn't broken any laws. But a lot of people are arguing that because she is the wife of the British Chancellor, that she shouldn't claim this status, that she should pay all this extra tax. And I'm like, no,
because you should pay the tax on her wealth.
Yes, so she pays all the necessary taxes she's ever had to pay or ever does pay in line with the UK tax system. Is perfectly fine. She hasn't broken the law. She also pays the taxes she's supposed to pay on the income in all the other countries where she's got all the other money. So she's actually one of the very few very wealthy people that seems to be very above board on all of this. And I do think there's probably because knowing that probably her husband wanted some political career at some point, I think there's played a big factor in that. But I also just think from what I know of her, just by reading, I've never met her, but from what I know of her, she seems like a very reasonable and decent human being. Yeah, the press in some factions of the Labour Party in particular have really gone after her. And they started to make this a kind of moral argument about saying, is it right that somebody who has the wealth of Rishi Sunak, who made his own fortune while he was working for hedge funds, who's then married into, this particular family who are worth God knows how much money realistically, is it right that he is the chancellor? He's the guy that's dictating the economy. Can he really understand the people working on universal credit? When I don't know if you remember that really famous photograph where he had that thermos that was like 180 quid. Do you remember? Yeah. And it's like, oh no, a guy who buys something like that, can he really understand the plight of the ordinary man, as the phrase goes? But I just find it so distasteful and like so ridiculous, because the question I always want to ask these people who kind of put this argument forward is, what is the pound figure? How much money do you have to have before you suddenly are incapable of empathizing with another person? What's the pound figure? If the money is the problem, well, how much money is too much money? And I never really get a satisfactory answer on that. Everyone keeps saying, oh, it's about the principle, it's about the broad morality of everything. And I'm like, no, this isn't a morality question. This is a legal question. She hasn't broken the law. Don't get me wrong. It would be a lot easier if she had broken the law, because then, she gets the book thrown at her, he resigns, and everybody moves on. The problem that why this is lingering around is the fact that she hasn't broken the law, and neither is Rishi. So yeah, from a kind of PR standpoint, that's kind of stuck in bad optics, despite having done nothing wrong, which is in politics is the worst place you can ever be, because you're fighting moral arguments, and you're not fighting legal ones, despite the fact this is a legal argument. But yeah, so this is going to rage on for a long time. It doesn't really help that this is in the middle of the cost of living crisis, where bills have gone up by 700 quid on average, everything is increasing in price. The spring statement kind of was a bit of a flop. There wasn't really much in it for people. It didn't go as far as some people wanted it to. And, the next thing is it turns out that his wife, this multimillionairess, isn't paying her, what looks like she isn't paying her fair share in tax, well, despite the fact that she is under the law. It's a mess. It is a genuine chaotic mess. I don't like this line that's coming out of Team Rishi at the minute of, well, who's leaking against it? Because this was apparently leaked. How true that is.
I get this information, though, surely. I don't think.
Yeah. This is where this narrative kind of breaks down, because this story is actually an old story. Private Eye ran an exclusive on this in March last year.
Okay.
So it's not a new story. It's just the Labour Party in particular have launched an attack on Rishi Sunak because he's seen as the successor to Boris Johnson. And when you look at the polling between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, it's a lot closer than they would like it to be. He's, for a long time, his favorability likings were significantly higher than Keir's. So, it seemed ridiculous that the chancellor, a conservative chancellor, in the time of cost of living crisis, who was putting taxes up, was more popular than the leader of the Labour Party. And, I think that's really where this has come from. But no, it is a bit of a mess. And there's this new accusation that's just come out about them having green card residency, which is them to be something with American citizenship. Yeah, so this is, but they've again, they haven't confirmed whether they say that they haven't got it now, but they've never said whether they used to have it, because there's a bit in it when you claim green card residency that it's supposed to be your ultimate home, that you're supposed to kind of have a bit of an allegiance to the United States. So this idea that how can a British chancellor have an allegiance to a foreign country? Well, I always feel the need to point out to people that Boris Johnson was born in New York. So, it's a fact that a lot of people often forget about, that he's actually, he's born an American. Yet most people consider him to be the most British thing in the world. But so that line of attack, I think, is going to sink away. But everyone's saying, "Oh, he needs to resign. He needs to resign." I don't think he needs to resign. I just don't think he's going to survive this crisis.
You think?
I will be surprised. I really will. His favorability, his polling numbers have tanked.
It's a bit because he's such a. What's interesting about what I find interesting on this story is he's not like he's been a really typical conservative chancellor at all. He's barely been conservative sometimes. That's been one of the big. It's not like he's somebody who's made taxes really low.
I know.
He's given away how much money in the last few years. Like he's been.
He's like the complete opposite of George Osborne.
So that's why this argument. I thought it would be a lot worse for him had it been, like you said, George Osborne chancellor or something. Where this one I find a bit more. You
always have to remember what the Italian philosopher Machiavelli said. Always remember that hatred is born out of good deeds as well as bad ones. Rishi Sunak was riding incredibly high thanks to furlough. People loved furlough. I've said on another thing when I was talking about this earlier that I've never seen anybody get the Treasury to move at such speed as he was able to do. I mean, he designed furlough. This was all his idea.
Very efficient, I think.
He got so much support for it. He was like kind of the people's champion for some time. He saved people's businesses, he kept people out of off the poverty line as much as he could, and it's really since Partygate when he was seen as like the kind of heir to Boris Johnson that like the criticism really nailed home. And a lot of people are saying, well, it's number 10 briefing against him, and I'm saying, like, realistically they don't need to. And whether it comes to whether he's conservative enough, well, for my thing is always, I'd like lower taxes, I'd like us to have a more vigorous economy and growth and all the rest of it. But I also remember that we've just spent billions because of COVID. I also think we have to kind of put our economy in its kind of situation right now. My biggest criticism of a lot of people who criticize Rishi for not being conservative enough or not being like a Thatcherite or something like that is none of these people in history had to deal with the coronavirus. They never had to deal with a global pandemic and the closing down of the international monetary system. And that, I think people don't really grasp just how much damage that did and how much damage it continues to do. People just think, oh, COVID's over. I can go to the pub now. Everything should be fine. It's not, and I think one thing that I think the government should be doing right across all government departments is actually kind of in their kind of messaging, educating the public on how this stuff actually works. Because, for me and you who kind of work in this kind of world, we know this stuff, and everybody listening at home who's engaged in politics knows this stuff. Thing is, it's your average man in the street who probably watches the news when he gets, when he wakes up, and he watches the 6 o'clock, maybe the 10 o'clock news. And that's about as much information as he gets. For those people, the education gap is there on how some of this stuff works. And I think the government really should be doing a little bit more to educate people, because I actually think then when the government puts forward its arguments as to why it's doing what it's doing, it's going to get further.
I think for sure during lockdowns and stuff, they should have been saying, by the way, we're locking down a country and there is going to be serious implications after this. But I think you've made a really good point about the impact of COVID and stuff. And I think we had Jeffrey Archer on this platform who he really, because at this point, I'll be honest, I was getting a bit really frustrated with lockdowns. We did this podcast, I think it was during the second or third lockdown. At this point, I was getting very frustrated with it. I was just saying, we're having a real back and forth. And he put it to me really, and I was asking about Rishi Sunak in the sense of, do you think he's conservative enough or whatever? And he made a really good comparison, if you like. He's like, look at this as World War III, right? When you're in a war or whatever, a massive thing, you have to sacrifice your principles, whatever they are. You've just got to do what you need to do to survive. And that's where we are now. And I thought that was a really good way of putting it for people.
I completely agree with that sentiment. Yeah. Really one thing I do kind of admire about the Labour Party over the kind of over most of COVID-19 is they didn't do pointless criticism for the sake of it. They did walk in step with the government when it was necessary to, and maybe they should have pushed back a little bit harder here and there and over lockdowns, and captured hindsight, or when they did try to make policy, they made a mess of it. But it wasn't. People did put the kind of petty politics to one side and actually work together. I know, there was a lot of cross-party work done over COVID, particularly when it came to Wales and Scotland as well. The kind of Northern Ireland. That sense of kind of working together actually showed, that it is possible. But it is interesting that as soon as COVID ended, everybody went back to hating each other. I thought it was very endearing of some people who were saying, oh, well, maybe this will foster a new era of cooperation, and everybody, people, countries around the world will start working together, and then kind of look at what's happened after we got war in Ukraine and everybody hates each other.
Well, I don't know. My issue with Labour was at the time, I like the cooperation stuff. Again, maybe it's just because of my personal thing on lockdowns. I really wanted more scrutiny. That was what I really, really wanted more. And I felt like the person who was given the best scrutiny was Steve Baker. I felt like it was Tories were given the best scrutiny towards it. And I said, I'm not saying I don't know enough in terms of whether we should have had a second or third lockdown. I just really want it scrutinized, and I want everyone to know the implications of what's going to happen. Now.
Oh, definitely. I couldn't agree more with you on that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a huge Steve Baker fan. On some stuff, I think he's great. On other stuff, I'm not so keen. But I do like his constant need to kind of for Parliament to have its say in things, and for Parliament to be scrutiny. What I really hope, somewhere in Whitehall, there's a team somewhere that's writing down everything that went well over COVID and everything that went terrible over COVID, and then at least the next time this happens, because I'm going to be honest with people, this is going to happen again. We then have a better framework about how this stuff works, and about how we kind of, lock down the country, and about maybe we should have committees that look at what the government's doing. We can actually have a better plan for the next time this happens. I think
they're doing that. Do you think
I would like to think so. I would hope so. I'd like to think somebody's maybe written a post-it note somewhere, but I don't know whether they're actually doing. But we'll just have to live and wait and see on that one. But it's going to be interesting times. But I do agree with you. One thing I really want to see happen is particularly the investigation into how the government handled COVID.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, and I want that to be full ranging. I want that to be no holds barred. I don't want the government to claim any kind of privilege or anything like that. I think the country needs to know what happened. One, for us to kind of get a bit of closure over it, because I think a lot of people are still reeling from lockdown. But a lot of people are still feeling its effects. Whether it be psychologically or in their health or whatever. And I think that kind of we can say look, this has happened. We learn about it, we improve for next time, and we can kind of close the book, and then we can move on. I think because we haven't done that yet, and we keep having what I call the COVID hangover, that everything is kind of just lingering on. On a Sunday after you've been after a few pints on a Saturday afternoon, you're like, oh God, it's just taking forever for me to feel normal again. I think because we haven't, had anything to eat, and we haven't had any water yet, or we still got our hangover from it. And I think that's how we move on as a country from COVID, for sure.
I think that's a really good point. I would love, and the thing is, I actually wouldn't be even annoyed at the government, because I know there's going to be mistakes that they've made and things they could have done better. I think the majority of people would accept it as well. I don't feel like we would sit here and say, oh my God, Boris Johnson, why didn't you? I think we'd actually respect them a lot more if they did this report and it highlighted all the things that they could have done better. I really don't think the public would nail them for it.
No, I don't think they would either.
We'd really respect the thing.
I think this is why I said it needs to be broad ranging. It needs to be honest and upfront. I think the minute that the government, whoever it is, by the time we actually get to the time of having this investigation and the reports of it all, start claiming any kind of privilege, I think that's when we've got a problem. I think that is when we're seeing that it looks like the government's hiding something, and I think that is going to play absolutely disastrously. I think it's going to be awful. I don't think a government could actually recover from that, because that is a fundamental thing, and that is trust. And don't get me wrong, trust in politics has probably never been lower than it is right now, and that could be the final nail in the coffin for it, if I'm being honest.
Do you think Rishi Sunak, so in terms of trust, do you think his trust has gone down with everything that's happened?
Oh, good question.
Do you think people trust
I don't think it's trust that's Rishi's problem in the public. I think he has a problem of whether he seems to really get what people are going through. He doesn't come across as overly sympathetic. It might just be how he holds himself, how he speaks, but he doesn't come across as though one of the best people who had this was actually Jeremy Corbyn. The way he used to be able to lean into the camera and look down with these kind of solemn eyes and looked like he was really empathizing with you. He hasn't learned how to do that. And the other one who was really good at it, and was terrifyingly good at it, was John McDonnell. If you ever looked at John McDonnell when the Labour Party had been caught doing something terrible, which was pretty much all the time, when he was on Question Time or something like that, he'd slow his speech down. He'd look directly into the camera, so he was looking right at you, and that's how he would explain to him that, well, this happened, and we feel terrible for it. Rishi hasn't done that. He hasn't got that skill. So when he does give in,
do you think that's a left skill? Because I think the left are better at sympathy than us.
I think it is, but I think you also have to remember that Rishi Sunak is an economist. He's a very rational person. I think how his brain works and how to get to he was a top analyst at Goldman Sachs. You don't get to that kind of job by being a bit of a sappy thing. And I don't know whether he's kind of got that skill yet. Prime ministers definitely need it. But it is a learned skill, I think, particularly to convey it in the way that people want. Because I remember after the Grenfell fire disaster, Theresa May was considered to be cold and uncaring. And actually, if you've ever met Theresa May, or she used to actually know her to be a very warm, very caring kind of person. But
my local MP.
Yeah. Oh, of course she will be. But she didn't come across very well when she'd really just become prime minister about how to do that. I think this is where Rishi is on this problem. I don't think it's a trust problem. I actually think people trust Rishi quite a lot, but I think it's just the people want more from him, and I think they feel a little let down that they haven't got it. Basically, that the economy isn't doing overly well. People are feeling the pinch a little bit more, and they just want someone to say, I get it. Interestingly, if you want to go back to American politics, look at Bill Clinton in 1994. Bill Clinton in 94 was able, don't get me wrong, a different set of issues for everything, but his ability to kind of empathize with somebody and to make you feel like he actually cared, it's a masterclass. It is an absolute masterclass.
There's a video. It's an incredible video. You've probably seen it where he talks to that mixed-race woman about, I can't remember what she said. She asked a question about her area where she's saying, she's struggling, she's working multiple jobs and she's trying to make ends meet. And he's up against George Bush Senior, and George Bush Senior has given quite a decent speech or whatever to her. And she keeps saying, but how does it affect you? Like, how does the rising cost, blah, blah, affect you? And he really couldn't answer it. He's like, well, I've got nieces. I've got, I've got some of my children's friends who are it was something like that. Whereas Bill Clinton, he bounces off his chair. He walks right up to her, looks from the before he's even spoken, like, my God, you could feel it just watching the video.
Sometimes it could come across as manipulative if you don't know how to play it right, but I do know the clip you're on about, because I think it's one that pretty much every politics student studies about. Because I did a lot of work in political communication, so this is kind of it's one of those things that we looked at quite a lot. But if I think I remember rightly, I think he just said something like, I get it. I think he held this woman's hands or something, didn't he? He just says, I'm listening and I get it. And I think that was one of the real turning points in that election. And if Rishi is able to do that, I actually think he could be quite an unstoppable prime minister, because he's definitely intelligent. I think he could be really good. I really do. Don't get me wrong, I've still got my doubts about him. But I think it's good to have doubts. And I'm not a fanatic in any way. But I have a lot more faith in him than I do in Liz Truss. Put it that way.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm not anti Liz Truss. I think she's a great minister. I think she's doing wonders as foreign secretary at the minute with the Ukraine stuff, but I just don't see her in the big job. And I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. But at the moment, I just don't see it. For me, I see it as the kind of next Michael Gove, as like the version that you throw into positions to get something up to a certain level, to standard, and then you kind of move them on. You know, if you need a safe pair of hands or something to do, I think she's going to be the next Michael Gove. Because I don't know if you remember, at one point, Michael Gove was basically running the entire government. You know, he was Secretary of State for so many things. He had to get like a business card that was about this big. And I think that's probably what Liz Truss is probably going to be. But, you know, there's still a lot of people who disagree with me on that. And, you know, I get told off for that opinion quite a lot. But for me, if it was down to those two, my money's on Rishi.
Interesting. I feel like Liz would polls better. You'll probably know better. I feel like Liz polls better with Tories, and Rishi polls better with the public. Is that
exactly? That is bang on. That is absolute bang on. The public. I haven't really seen much since she's become foreign secretary and all the Ukraine stuff. I'm not really seeing much of that, but definitely beforehand when it was all the Partygate stuff, Rishi was always seen as the kind of the public's person, and Liz Truss was seen as the party's person. And
it'll be an interesting battle, though.
It will. It trust me, it will. But one thing, if Boris goes, and it is an if Boris goes, I actually think one thing that the Conservatives will need is a speedy election. I actually think a coronation would be better than an election, because I think it would play very badly that the Tories are playing internal party politics games while, you know, people are on the breadline. You know, I don't think that narrative would play very well. And if Boris is going to go, he's either got to resign pretty soon, or, you know, he's got to be bounced out of office pretty soon, because the new prime minister, whoever it is going to need about a year or so to cement themselves in the role before the next general election. And we're what, it's going to be 2024 is the what? Yeah. 2024 is the next one. Yeah, so you know, and that's not that far away, and politically it's an even shorter amount of time. So if he is going to go, he needs to make his mind up. But again, that's all down to Partygate stuff, but which will probably be something everybody will be talking about in about 2 weeks' time, I suspect.
I think I have a bet with you over a pint that Boris lasts beyond the local elections.
Yeah, I think yes, we talked about that last time we were together. Yeah. So my theory was always that they were going to keep Boris around to soak up all the negative stuff over the local elections, get all the bad headlines, and then they'll boot him to the curb. And then they'll kind of like draw a line under him saying, and then move forward. That would be the sensible thing to do. But this is the Conservative Party of the United Kingdom we're talking about, and sensible is a word that very rarely is even in the same room as anybody talking about it.
Well, that'll be fascinating. I'm honestly, I'm really interested to see how the Rishi thing pans out with his wealth, because again, going back to Jeffrey Archer, I think I'm actually going to speak to him about this again. He spoke a lot about wealth and politics. So he, for people who don't know Jeffrey Archer that well, you know, he got into local politics, became an MP in his 20s, was kind of, you know, like the next big thing in politics, you know. And he had a very quick and damaging downward spiral. Obviously got arrested, went to prison.
I can say that's some quick and downward spiral.
a pretty extreme spiral downhill. And then he actually started writing whilst he was in prison. And now he's, I think, the second or third fastest selling author in
he's
sold over 320 million. Like, it's crazy. But he talks a lot about wealth in the podcast I had with him, where he says he actually spoke to Sajid Javid in his 20s. And Sajid Javid at this point was a rising star in the Conservative Party. He wasn't elected for anything, but he was thinking of becoming an MP, Sajid Javid, and he was speaking to Jeffrey Archer. And Jeffrey Archer said to him, look, no, you need to focus on your career first. You need to have wealth. So the big mistake he had was he got into politics, became an MP in his 20s, and his reliance of his income was politics. His career was politics, and he looks back and then that was wrong. It would have been better for him to have a career first. So he said to Javid, have a career first, do what you're doing in finance, and then in your 40s, if you're still interested, then go for it. It's different nowadays. You can rise up to the cabinet within a few years. Back in his day, it takes 10, 20 years,
Oh
whatever.
God, yeah, 100%.
So I thought it was really good advice, and I listened to that personally. I was like, well, I don't really have any inspiration to be an MP, but even more so, it makes sense being financially secure, and then you're going into this role purely to serve the people, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense, but then it goes back to your question. Maybe Rishi has too much money, right? So where's the line?
I think everything you just said then, I couldn't agree with it more. This idea that people go into politics to make money, no. Anybody, there's not very much money actually sloshing around that you make from being a politician.
Yeah.
Most people go into politics, like you say, after they've already made their money, mainly because there is no money in politics. But again, it comes back to the question: is how much money is too much money? What's the pound figure? And at what point do you suddenly start living a completely different life to the people that you represent? Because take, for example, the average MP salary is now about £84,000, I think.
Right.
That's nearly twice the national average salary, which sounds between 32 to 37. So can even a normal MP actually represent people in, say, a really poor area of the country when you're earning potentially 2-3 times the amount that they do? I don't know the answer to these questions. I generally don't. And I hope that we're going to start having a sensible conversation about them. But given how this one's going right now over the Rishi Sunak and taxation, I'm not holding out much hope, if I'm being honest.
I'm going to put a bit of an interesting spin on this. And I've said this before. I think MPs should get paid more. Because I think you want to attract the best, brightest, smartest, most qualified people. And I honestly think they should be paid more. Because I don't know, why else would you take that job? Like, I don't really understand the attraction behind it. And I when the David Cameron stuff happened, with him and Rishi Sunak, the alleged things of him getting, favorable stuff from Rishi. For me, where I really wanted Labour to do is actually go into what happens post Prime Minister. Like, America has a system where the president continues to get paid even when he's no longer president. The idea is, I think, he will hopefully act a bit more accordingly. He won't sell secrets. He won't have to, he or she, whatever, they can live. In this country, I don't know exactly what happens post Prime Minister. But I wanted that to be a good debate. I thought that was a really good opportunity for Labour to come in and own it and maybe say, you can't lobby for 15 years, but you should get, I don't know, like, just...
The reason that the Labour Party would never go in on that particular debate is how Tony Blair behaved after being Prime Minister. So, my biggest problem with Tony Blair was not necessarily anything he did in office. Don't get me wrong, I don't agree with a lot of it. But how he behaved afterwards. He went on to do this peace envoy role. He was consorting with some very nefarious figures. He wasn't exactly being what we would expect as a British Prime Minister. And when it comes to the Labour Party, then talking about second jobs and and all the rest of it after being Prime Minister, they're then going to have to start defending their former leader and their probably most successful leader, who a lot of people in the country still have a sense of admiration for in some way or another. Not huge amounts, but he's still a figure. But it's going to be on that one. I just don't know where we're going. I just don't know. And actually, for me, I like to know at least a vague destination as to where we're going. But on this one, I actually like the fact that we're having conversations like this, like people like me and you, and I even hear people talking about this stuff in the pub of all places. It is. I know. Yeah. To be fair, these are pubs in Westminster, so they're not exactly your average pub. But debate is the most important thing we can have on this, and the more opinions we have is a good thing.
I think that's a good note to end it on. Yeah, it's been good having you on, Peter. I'm sure we'll have you on again sometime.
No, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me. This has been great.
Awesome. Well, speak to you soon.
Yeah, speak to you soon.